So around this time that I got pregnant, before that had even happened, I was unaware of the ranking and position of James Cartwright. So I didn't know or understand why all of a sudden my cell phones kept getting stolen from me. And I was, some of Chris Dabney's friends were from the Department of Justice. He introduced them to me, and he told me that, and they let me know that they worked in the computer department. And they tipped me very well. They were some of the high tippers and would buy many rounds of drinks and food and different things, which brought their bill up, and then they would tip for that, at least to start, and that's what they did. However, I don't know what else was going on, because I wasn't aware that I was not only a torture victim and trying to get political asylum and had this ongoing situation with my son. I didn't realize that there were now even more individuals involved that made me a person of interest. Not in a criminal way, because I've never committed crime, but because of who knew who and who was connected to who. And while I worked there, I had, and in a probably 2-3 month period, I had about 6 cell phones stolen from me. One of the times that my cell phone was stolen, it was stolen by one of the Department of Justice workers that Chris Dabney knew, who had already told me he worked for the Department of Justice for the computer division. And he stole my cell phone from me when I was in a taxi. He tried to kiss me. I didn't. I possibly kissed him one time. I'm not sure if I did or if I turned away. I possibly maybe kissed him, and that was it, but nothing else. And I'm kind of thinking maybe I didn't. I don't remember. All I know is that he was right there and very close to me, and he used that as an opportunity to grab my cell phone from me. And I noticed as he got out of the cab, I looked for my cell phone. It was gone, and he had just left with my cell phone. And before we got into a cab that night, he had been looking into my purse and kept eyeballing my purse. So I knew that I had no doubt that he had stolen my cell phone. I had my cell phone on me before I was even in that taxi. So my cell phones kept getting stolen, and then I was wondering why anyone was interested in taking my cell phones from me. And the only time I was able to identify an individual that did steal it, it was the Department of Justice. So basically, while they were spying on me and stealing my property and having me go to a great inconvenience by having to constantly replace my cell phone, they were giving me a few extra bucks here and there. And the other thing that I noticed in a group of people that were spying on me, there were some probably different internationals who might have been interested in me, but later, actually at that time, even when I was at the Post Pub, and then later I noticed there were a lot of Russian Jews. I was finding out that they were Jewish, and then they had some kind of other connection. And I assumed that these Jews were coming out of the woodwork because they were mad at me since I had become pregnant when Chris Dabney was dating their this woman who was Jewish. She was probably 26 years old, something like that. She was younger than I was, and had dark hair, and was Jewish. And so I believe some people took it out on me. and they wanted me to be punished for that. But I had a black man, even one time, who was sort of friends with Chris, one time come up to me and say, well, how can you still hang out with Chris when he says he has a girlfriend? He has a girlfriend. And I said, they're not engaged. Which is the truth. I met him before, I had met him before he met this other person, and they weren't engaged. It wasn't like I was cheating with a married person. And it was after that that I got set up by Nikki to be with this married person. But I was almost like blackout drunk, which was very rare. It was maybe the only time that I ever remember being blackout style drunk. And he said, this one man, I was sort of just wanting to forget about the whole part of here's another one in the hole. Because who wants to think about that? And I wasn't piecing together who was connected to who. But different people wanted to just find excuses to punish me for various reasons. I remember that the other thing that sort of concerned me, or that I noticed and didn't know what it was about, and I think later it was more concerning. I wasn't sure at the time. But I got a call from Mark, that truck driver, after I'd been hanging out with Chris Dabney a little bit, and we weren't totally serious. He hadn't... I'm trying to remember at what point in the relationship it was, or whatever. And for whatever reason, I had the impression that it was a very casual thing for him. He had first said on that first day that I was his girlfriend. But then after that, I kind of wondered if it was just more of a casual thing. And maybe he had met this Jewish woman by then. I don't remember the circumstances. I just remember that Mark called up and he wanted to come visit me. So after I'd had a couple drinks at the bar, of course, then Mark drove into that area, that section of town, in his semi-truck and parked. And then he basically wanted to hook up with me, and we did a little bit. But then what I noticed is when he dropped me off at the Post Pub, and Chris Dabney did a little, he had a hat on, I think. I never saw him with a hat. But maybe he had a hat, or maybe he just did a salute or something. And then Mark did a little hat thing, or a salute. And basically, Mark and Chris Dabney, who I had thought were not connected at all, why would I think that they were? They basically looked over at each other, made eye contact, and did sort of a salute to each other, like they already knew who they were. And thank you very much. That was the first time that I realized, okay, well, if Mark had assaulted me in his truck, and then, I was playing dumb about that, and then, he was wanting to be intimate after I was intoxicated, then all of a sudden, I'm finding out there's a connection between him and Chris Dabney, who got me intoxicated, and then as he was having sex with me, just as he was starting, said, here's another one in the hole. So the other thing is that while I was attracted later, in a lot of ways I tried to forget about those things and put them out of my mind. And while I was attracted to him in different ways, I also noticed, one time he was following me, like when I went towards the FBI headquarters, he was kind of following me to see where I went. I really have a feeling that with his friends in the Department of Justice, who were stealing my cell phones, and with his friend Mark, the U.S. Army military guy who knew that I was being assaulted with technology and being tortured. The one that was from Boston, Massachusetts, who came up who showed up when I called the FBI in New Mexico. I have a pretty strong feeling that there is definitely a gangbang circle that the FBI is unwilling to admit to. FBI and military. And potentially other federal employees. So when a couple years later down the road, I'm being thrown into a psych ward for no cause and being injected with Haldol, I would probably say that that's being retaliated against in political punishment and an attempt by the government to shut me up before I say anything. I'm not exactly sure who would conduct an investigation. I know for a fact my son, by law, must be returned to me because he was taken by the United States federal government under false pretenses, and they basically took him like property. And they were while they were committing crimes. So my son was taken from me basically like my son was kidnapped from me. The government, the United States government, has acted like a mafia in every way. They've acted, as I say, I think maybe worse than mafias. But I know that some mafias work with the government, so who's to say? All I know is that they took my son, just like, if they accused a mobster of having some kind of human, or a mafia, of having a human trafficking ring, and then, they seized all of the assets, like in a RICO case, they seized the vehicles, the houses, anything that they thought had been taken in the commission during the commission of a crime. Well, the United States federal government was raping me, and through various employees that knew each other. So it was a setup. I mean, it's been a setup all along. It's not like I'm a floozy. I've been set up, and they continued to do that to me after they stole my son from me, which kind of kind of gives credence to the idea that somebody did think that if I had a child with me, that would be an obstacle, because I guess if they'd already raped me that many times, they thought they could keep doing that. I mean, maybe that's what the government thought that they were going to do, is continue to use me to service their federal men and employees. And continue to get away with it. I mean, I just thought, maybe they thought, well, if we rape her while she's incapacitated 5 times, and then she tries to make a report and sees it goes nowhere, and then we set her up and she keeps getting raped, we're going to break her down. She doesn't have anything now. We took all of her money, we took her education, we took everything from her, including her son, and now she's dependent upon us, the same people who raped her. And it's going to be easy to continue this trajectory if she doesn't have a kid with her. And that's what they did. That's what they were doing. So I definitely, I had not introduced Mark to Chris Dabney. So there's no reason why Mark would look over at Chris Dabney, and Chris Dabney would be standing outside of the Post Pub looking over at Mark, and they would be nodding off to each other in sort of a military way, or FBI way. And and Mark has the Canadian porn in his truck. And he's doing the same thing that Bruce and Corinne did to me in Canada when I was set up there. So basically it's like I was being shuttled along from one criminal colluder to another. It's like they didn't want me to get outside of their box.